All right, welcome everyone. We're gonna give people a minute or so to join before we hop in. And while we're waiting for folks to join, please comment with what city and state that you're joining us from. Right, Chicago, Ohio, New York, Washington. All right, people all over. This is great.
Fellow Seattleite.
Yeah. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, we'll give people a minute or so to join, and then we'll hop in and just share what city or state you're joining us from. North Carolina. Oh, a fellow Denver person. I'm also in Denver. Oh, Boulder. Awesome. Great. All right, so I think we can go ahead and get started. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm Amy from Results Lab, and I am here with my colleague Rahul, and I'm just so glad that all of you could join us. At Results Lab, we want organizations to build a culture of learning that embraces data. So today, Rahul will share 5 tips to use data to drive meaningful conversations. Now, as questions come up, please put them in the chat. We also have held space for questions at the end, and we've recognized that people feel comfortable showing up in different ways in these virtual sessions. And so we really encourage you to ask questions either in the chat or by turning on your camera and sharing that way, really whatever feels comfortable for you. And also want to mention that we'll be sending a recap with this recording and the key takeaways at the end. So with that, Raul, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see all of you from kind of all over the country. Let's just get started. So a little bit about Results Lab. We are an organization that works primarily with organizations working in the social good space or the social impact space. And we help organizations bring data to life with cutting edge, simplified, actionable tools. And we really help you kind of catalyze change for the people that you serve. So today we'll be talking, I'm very excited to be talking about tips that we can use to use data to drive meaningful conversations. As I start walking through the tips, I will also try to provide practical examples and kind of usable templates that organizations like yourselves can use. And I'll obviously try to make it as relatable as possible. And as Amy mentioned, we would like you to show up in whatever way you're comfortable with. We'll also be releasing polls. So just Zoom polls throughout the session, which we would really love for you to participate in. The polls will be entirely anonymous. So please feel free to show up and respond to those polls as you are able. With that, let's kind of dive in. So when we start talking about kind of meaningful conversations, what do we think, what makes a conversation meaningful? So how are we defining what meaningful means? So meaningful conversations involve listening to our communities, donors, and partners by understanding and collaborating with them. So this listening is enhanced by data, which plays a key role by providing evidence of needs and also illustrating impact. At Results Lab, we see data as more than just numbers, and we think that when data is presented well, it can shape stories, inspire change, and really encourage dialogue. As many of you may know, it can be easy to just hop right into a problem and try to solve it as quickly as possible. And usually, sometimes what happens with that is instead of asking for feedback from your community that you're working with on a solution that's already designed, we need to make sure that our solutions are as sustainable as possible and they resonate with people that they are intending to benefit in the community. So ensuring that we have these kind of conversations by building trust and aligning with kind of their shared goals. We want to make sure that these solutions are sustainable and are kind of aligning with the priorities of the stakeholders and the target audiences that we want to work with. The data also enables us to kind of engage with purpose and essentially empowers us to connect with stakeholders much more effectively and much more authentically. So I would love for all of you to kind of drop in chat what, according to you, makes a meaningful conversation, and what do you think are the conditions or the context that is required to have such a meaningful conversation? So please feel free to drop it in chat. Feel free to unmute if you're comfortable as well. But would love to hear from some of you kind of what, according to you, makes a conversation meaningful. We'll keep going if you have. So, okay, we see a balance between sharing and listening. Love that. Absolutely. Listening is a very important part of kind of building that trust towards making a conversation meaningful. So thank you for that, Caitlin. Please feel free to let the responses roll in as we kind of start move forward. So these are the kind of 5 tips that we've curated in order to drive these meaningful conversations. First is knowing your audience. So making sure that we identify stakeholders. Also, we have another response coming in: common foundation, shared connection, understanding. Absolutely. Having a kind of making sure that we're aligned on, oops, I don't know what's happening with the slides. Yeah, absolutely. So, having a common understanding, a shared purpose of what we are working towards is very important towards making those conversations meaningful. So starting with the kind of tips, number one, knowing your audience, identifying your stakeholders, who you're working with is essential in having that common foundation, right? Making sure that we know exactly who our audience is to be able to start tailoring conversations, tailoring data, tailoring communication towards what it is that they need is essential. The second is identifying relevant data. So making sure that we are not sharing or we're not collecting too much information or too less information, and making sure that whatever data is relevant is being identified before we start engaging with these stakeholders. Third is visualizing your data. And again, I recognize that this is easier said than done. So we will talk about some templates, but visualizing data really, really helps with processing a large amount of data very, very quickly. 4 is impact stories, which we have started really loving at Results Lab, and we've started advocating for. It really takes data and visuals down to the storytelling and also makes collecting a lot of these stories very accessible and very meaningful. And then finally, we have creating a space for two-way dialogue. And I see a lot of great responses: safety to share, active listening, inspired to act as a result of the meaningful conversations. Love it. Great. So let's dive straight in. So the first is knowing your audience and essentially using data to effectively understand who you're speaking to, right? Different audiences have different interests and knowledge levels and concerns. So before diving into the data, we need to ask ourselves, what does my audience care about? What problems are they trying to solve? And how can I help them solve those problems, right? So for instance, when you're talking to nonprofits about a particular or if you're talking to a specific kind of audience about a particular data point, are you presenting it to the executives in that organization or that nonprofit, or are you presenting it more towards the managers? For executives, you might want to talk about outcome orientation and results, while for managers, you may be interested in a lot more like hands-on practical solutions, right? So understanding your audience will really enable you to tailor your messages in a way that resonates with them, whether they're donors, beneficiaries, community members. And really, when we listen to all of these kind of different perspectives, we can develop solutions that are much more responsive, much more culturally affirming, and much more equitable as well. And essentially tailoring the approach and using data collected from all of these various sources we can understand their needs and perspectives better. We can also ask questions like whose voice are we missing, right? By knowing kind of our audience, we can also identify what are the gaps in creating these meaningful connections. Next, let's talk about identifying relevant data. So again, this is one of the things that a lot of nonprofits really struggle with. Data can be overwhelming. I want to acknowledge that. But oftentimes it doesn't need to be. If we are able to create a much more focused kind of meaningful measurement practice, if we're able to focus our resources and energies on what it is that we really want to measure and communicate, we can really make data work for us. So especially at Results Lab, we believe that data is everywhere. Conversations that we have on a day-to-day basis are also the basis or the foundation of data, and that can be classified as data. So you need to identify what is relevant and what it is you want to measure to be able to communicate this effectively. Regardless of whether we have too much or too little data, using a kind of focused measurement approach can help us build a kind of very focused measurement practice. At Results Lab, we call this a learning agenda. So essentially, how we advocate for doing this is conduct an introspection activity for your organization by writing down your programs and services. Then write down the questions that you have about these programs. So once you have all of the programs and services listed in one place, what is it that you want to know about these programs and services that you can use data to answer? And once these questions are kind of, I'm sure you'll have all of your, there'll be a lot of curiosity about what it is, what is this program doing? Where is it going? What am I trying to measure? You can then use some kind of a ranking algorithm, depending on what's important to you, to then rank those questions and really use those questions to focus your measurement practice. So using this focus on data will align your programs to your mission. And it can include kind of outcomes, community needs assessments, donor trends, and it can also help overwhelming kind of your target audience or whoever you're talking to with too much information. So you need to focus on data that's both relevant to your audience and the message, and also help keep the conversation focused and impactful. So again, for example, if you're trying to, if you're focusing on workforce trends generally, if you're working on generating employment, you can highlight data kind of on economy outcomes, on job outcomes, employee satisfaction, depending on who exactly you're talking to. And as you go through this kind of introspection activity, also remember that data can be fun. We have things like the focus group and surveys, but there are also less formal and equally insightful data collection opportunities that I would like to show you through this slide. So, oops. So in this slide, we essentially talk about all of the different methods that your organization can consider, depending on what the focus of the tool needs to be. So just as an example, if you want to capture relationships between people, places, and spaces, you can use social listening with social media. So if you have resources for that, you can dedicate it to social media. You can use a document review, and then you can obviously use surveys. If you want to capture information that is in a way that is participant-centered, you can use what we call journals, which is just collections of reflections that are happening throughout your participant engagement. You can use voice memos, artistic expression, which you can use like data murals. So you can ask your participants to, after your program, you can ask participants to write or physically express how they are feeling as a result of the program. You can also capture if you want to capture relations between people if you want to capture changes in skills, knowledge, and practices, you can use surveys, polls, and that have already been kind of developed and used across the organization. And you can use assessments or tests like polls, similar to what we'll be using today. So just want to pause here to ensure that we're kind of absorbing this. And then after this, we would love to launch a poll to ask which data tool do you or your organization end up using more frequently. So if you can just launch the poll here, and we'd love to see the kind of responses trickle in, and then we can just have a quick discussion. Great. So we have a lot of responses coming in. Surveys, I think, are one of the most heavily used tools, which is totally understandable. Focus groups come a close second. Um, Please drop in chat. I see a lot of other responses as well. I see a question coming in. Can you share more about what social listening on social media looks like? Absolutely. So if there is it's essentially just listening to what your respondents are saying on social media. So, for example, if your organization puts out a flyer or a pamphlet on social media, putting out some information about an activity or an event that you're having, you can start tracking what people are saying in the comments. You can also release polls on social media on, after the event to see how they're feeling. Generally, just kind of try to collect data from how people are responding to your events on social media. And there can be different variations to that as well. But essentially some form of listening to what your community or what your stakeholders are saying through social media as well. Great. So I think most of the poll responses focused on surveys, focus groups, interviews. If you are comfortable, I would love to hear more about the other. So what are the other tools that your organization uses? Please feel free to drop that in chat. I'm just sharing the results here. Great. So with that, let's move on to our next kind of next step, which is visualizing your data. So as I'm sure most of you all are aware, people process visual information much faster than text, and how you present your data is crucial. So obviously, instead of bombarding our audiences with lots of spreadsheets, charts, graphs, infographics, charts, graphs, and infographics can make the data much more digestible. And visualization turns raw numbers basically into a story that's much more, I don't know what, sorry about that. So visualization turns raw numbers into a story that's much easier to follow. And as you create these visualization tools, some of the things to keep in mind is colors, shapes, layouts that can direct attention to the most critical parts of your data. And it can be a very effective way to kind of simplify very complex situations and also help stakeholders to grasp the significance of your work very quickly. So again, I recognize that this is also kind of easier said than done. A lot of organizations struggle with kind of different, how to generate different data collection tools. So I've just compiled some examples that you can of data visualizations that you can use to effectively communicate with your stakeholders. So we've created this quick, what we like to call a gallery walk, just to kind of walk through the different examples of data collection tools that are available. So the number one tool is probably a lot of you have probably heard of this or come across this, is essentially a dashboard. So a dashboard is a share out tool that can be updated regularly and is structured by your learning questions or key pieces of your measurement plan. So learning questions again are the questions that we just discussed, which are kind of the questions that you have from your programs that you want data to answer. So your dashboard is a really good way to a really good tool to kind of combine data that is coming in from a lot of different sources and have it all in one place to then visualize and create kind of different charts, different graphs to really showcase what you're doing. And we recommend aligning these dashboards to each of those learning questions that we just spoke about. So if a dashboard answers some of those bigger learning questions that you have about your programs, that will be a really effective way to target a lot of these communications towards your specific stakeholders. The other advantage of a dashboard is also that it's dynamic and it's always real time. So you don't the kind of once it's built, most of the heavy lifting is on the building side, but once it's built, it's a lot lower lift for organizations to then maintain those dashboards. Next, we have a one pager, which is a much more static form of a dashboard. So it has a combination of text, a combination of visuals that you can use to create kind of bulleted takeaways and visuals on kind of one page to keep it as succinct and as easily readable as possible. So again, a pretty common way of communicating through a visual medium, and a very effective way if you want to communicate impact of an event or impact of a program, just generally, and while keeping everything very succinct. Next, we have feature slides presentation, which again, it seems a little intuitive, but it is not used as frequently in the nonprofit sector as you would think. So expanding on the one pager, so think of it as a deck of essentially multiple one pagers conveying information about different programs and events that your organization usually runs. And just presenting key takeaways, utilizing many more visuals, and usually used in a medium that is meant to be engaging or meant to be kind of a two-way dialogue or communication. Next, we have a conversational share out. So again, not used as often, but sometimes very effective in communicating the kinds of data that you want. So when they are shared in a medium where you're just discussing it with a team member, especially if it's data that you want, that's a part of your orientation or aim to kind of align all of your team members towards one common objective. Conversational share out can be just very helpful and very effective. Also used to measure outputs or measure short-term outcomes, essentially, where you have an event and then you get together with a team or the staff and just essentially document all of the conversations that you're having. Great way of sharing data, great way of aligning everyone on kind of a shared vision as well. Then we have an infographic. So the visual show, which is essentially a visual storytelling tool that uses images, data visualizations, and text. So the way that this differs from a one pager is this is a lot less verbose and usually just used to present data in just a completely visual and graphic manner. So again, would love to open up the floor here to see which of these data collection tools or communication tools do you use more of in your organization? We'd love to know a little bit about what you all are using currently. Great. So a little more variation here. See quite a bit of dashboard, quite a bit of feature slides, which is nice to see, presentations. Also see quite a few conversational share outs, which is really, really great to see. Infographics as well. So a pretty well balanced kind of response set. I like that kind of the way that data is communicated is split amongst a lot of different data communication tools. So that's great. End the poll there. Thank you all for sharing. Great. So let's move on to the fourth tip, which is using impact stories. Again, this term may be slightly unfamiliar to a lot of the folks here, a lot of the organizations. But again, it really uses the power of storytelling and to really convey, or it can be used to both collect and convey information. So data alone often feels abstract, and when you try to convert that into storytelling, that can really be effective in communicating a lot of the things, a lot of the analysis that you want to portray. So essentially, the way we create impact stories is you focus on, again, try to focus on one or two learning questions, and based on that learning question, you will structure uh, a, da- a, a format or a template that you want to use for collecting data from a particular event. So, for example, if you have if you're running a therapy program or a mental health program, you can structure essentially a document as in the form of a journal to tell your to create an implicit way to not just collect data but also show the impact that you're creating. So you'll have headers in this impact story template that will guide the therapist, whoever the staff member is, towards telling their story of their participant through data, essentially. So creating a structured way of uh, keeping your data and structuring and collecting your data, but also can be used in a thematic manner to then analyze and showcase that data as well. If you are interested in learning more about how to create impact stories, there are two really, really useful and really great resources. One is by Civicus and the other is by the London School of Economics. Would really encourage you to peruse both these links and see if it's useful. They can be a really, really effective way of creating a story from your data and really incorporating it into your data collection practice as well internally through your staff members. So love if Amy and or Ellen could just drop those links into the chat. That would be great. While they do that, let's talk about just the final tip that we have today, which is creating a dialogue. So data-driven conversations, we think data-driven conversations should not be one way. Once you've presented this data, we really encourage you to invite questions, reflections, insights from your audience. And as many of you, I'm sure, are able to attest, the most productive ideas come from dialogue with your stakeholders. It also, of course, builds buy-in and makes people much more likely to engage with the data. So using guiding questions like, why is this happening? What is the context? What action should we be taking together? Can really open up these kind of very productive spaces and generate very actionable ideas. So by creating space for dialogue essentially turns data from something very passive and non-actionable into something much, much more actionable. And gives you a much more strategic direction to guide your outcomes towards. And also, of course, by making your stakeholders feel involved, you are also able to strengthen your relationships and foster a sense of deeper collaboration. And opening up, essentially creating these forums also can be very effective in uh, talking to philanthropies and talking to funders to expose these kind of board members to the other side of the coin. So we've seen a lot of nonprofits are have a lot of board members or a lot of philanthropies that are backing them, which sometimes don't understand the burden or the amount of resources that are required to uh, showcase their data through their reporting. So having these kind of facilitated dialogues, a two-way communication, really helps set those expectations and help kind of guide generally those conversations in the right direction. So that kind of concludes our 5 tips. Really appreciate you all listening. We would love to open the floor at this point to another poll on how do you currently create space for dialogue in your data discussions? What mediums are used? Would love to hear from all of you, and then we'd love to open up space for general discussion. Great. We have a lot of informal discussions coming in, which is great because it's kind of a non-structured, non-facilitated method of collecting or creating that discussion. Also see some surveys, feedback forms, which is great. Much more structured approach. Open Q&A sessions. And then again, as always, would love to hear what that other is. What are the other kind of spaces that you're currently creating to have those discussions? If you could just drop them in chat, that would be great. Office hours, love that. Yeah, office hours are a great way to kind of make sure that your uh, the the program is kind of meeting our needs, and also participants are getting a chance to to kind of address their questions. Convenings, great as well. Great. So thank you all for your input. Really helpful. I'm just going to share the results again. You all want to see them. And then with that, would love to have a discussion. Would love to bring in Amy and Ellen as well for this piece. Would love to know from or hear from all of you what ideas for communicating through data have been sparked for all of you, and has the idea of meaningful changed since the beginning of the session? And also, where do you see the biggest areas of development for your organization in having these meaningful communications? So, love to hear from all of you, and yeah, thank you so much.
Just wanted to sort of reiterate what I said at the top of the hour, just about like however you want to show up. If you want to mention anything in chat, if you want to come off camera and speak, would love to have a little bit more of a conversation, or also open it up to questions as well.
I do want to highlight this comment in chat, and I'd love for Caitlin, if possible, to speak to this, because I know you've done a lot of work on community insights. So Annie is saying, I'm feeling that a lot of members in our community are getting burnt out from being asked for their feedback or to participate in listening sessions. So trying to think about how to get input without being too much of a burden on them. So I'd love for Caitlin to speak on this. I think it's super important.
Hey, Annie, great question. Caitlin here. I'm a member of the Results Lab team, and I specialize in creative ways to capture insights and perspectives from community members. And what you're explaining here is a very, very common challenge. So I want to start by validating that. Some ways that we find to combat this challenge or face this challenge are twofold. So first, thinking about creative opportunities to capture data. And second, thinking about closing the loops. So I'm actually going to address these in vice versa. The more that you ask for feedback and collect data without sharing feedback back to members of the community, the more there's a sentiment building up of like, well, you asked me this question and I never saw what happened with it. And so one thing we do is encourage our clients to close the feedback loop. If you conducted a survey, share the results out. If you conducted focus groups, blast out or maybe put up an infographic on your wall at your location of what the findings were. The more that you can share what you heard and what you plan to do with it, the more you can build trust with your community that you're not just collecting information and having performative listening. So that's a big recommendation. And then on the other side, like, totally want to agree, like listening sessions can be very intensive and people get tired of participating in them. And so I want to encourage folks on the call to think about some less traditional ways of capturing data. Surveys are great, focus groups are great, but they are intensive and they require a lot of setup. They require a big time commitment. And so think about less formal, not less valid or less worthy forms of data collection, such as like intercept interviews. Where can you find people in the hallway and can you capture notes? Maybe consider doing like a real-time data capture with like sticky notes on a wall. Can people come by and just like slap a thought? So there's a lot of creative ways that you can capture listening that feel engaging, playful, can be a little bit more approachable and accessible to members of our community without being super academic and rigorous and overly structured to the point that it makes it hard for communities to participate or they get tired of participating. But always happy to continue the conversation, Annie. I think Amy put into chat how to have a follow-up conversation. So if you want to chat further or consider some of the ways that we can offer coaching and support around challenges with engaging community on listening and acting on that data, happy to follow up.
Thank you so much for that, Caitlin. I wanted to highlight one of the other questions that I saw. It says, can you speak more about the structure of your Q&As or other discussions? How do you encourage dialogue? I don't know, Raul, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sorry, I thought that was addressed to Caitlin again. Yeah, I think similar to what Caitlin was saying, making sure that feedback loop, I think it's really important to have some kind of a feedback loop based on the question and answer sessions as well. So definitely after the sessions, very important to kind of have that loop where you're getting back in touch with them, making sure that their needs and questions are met. But generally, I think the idea that someone else provided of office hours is a great way to structure Q&A sessions, both because it's not as resource heavy for your organizations to have one space for everyone to whatever the queries are to be voiced, but also because a lot of the questions that group may have could be answered in the group itself. So if I have a question, there could be another person with the same question. And at the same time, it could also create a potential for kind of that one-on-one discussion and dialogue. So yeah, just some of the ways that you can structure those Q&A sessions, and just some of the other ideas of an open hour or an open office hours as well is also a great idea.
Also happy to throw in some ideas here. So Rahul spotlighted some ways that you can highlight data, such as infographics or data walks. I think the Q&A is just a layer added of like, you've engaged in this, now let's just have an open conversation. What questions emerge? Where can we provide answers? Or where can we align on where we need to continue to refine our questions and continue to explore? I think there's a degree of openness, vulnerability, and saying, like, let's interpret this data together. It's not necessarily always, here are the findings, here's what it says, here's what we do. It's, what do these findings say to you? You might interpret these results differently than me. What would you do based on these results, based on what you know about the community, what our challenges are? And so it's just an open space to process and work through that data together and actively shift power dynamics and decision-making processes with our communities.
Thank you for that, Caitlin and Rahul. Does anyone else want to share any questions or thoughts that they have? Feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute and share. All right.
Amy,
Well,
I
I just
actually
want
have
to,
a question for Rahul.
yeah.
Rahul, I want to know what your favorite part of data sharing out, communicating, like you like the best or find most fulfilling.
That is a great question. So I think I'm definitely a person that really enjoys that feeling of so obviously there is this outcome oriented aspect of our work, right? Where we all are working towards some kind of deliverable, some kind of goal, especially in the social impact space. We come across some really meaningful work. But I think the biggest kind of high or the biggest win for me is just seeing in action the sparks that are created in a lot of these data sharing facilities. So we have a lot of like data use sessions, for example, where we essentially use frameworks and those learning questions that I discussed to bring a lot of the data that the organizations are working on to life and really translate them into actionable insights. So just seeing that kind of, that moment where they see everything come together, all of the strategy work, all of the questions that we've been asking, probing questions, translated into actual data, like real world data, that they can actionably use, and really use to inform their strategy as well. There's a lot of questions that all of us have, but really grounding in those learning questions and being focused on answering them through some kind of data. And it doesn't have to be like, a lot of times the most complex answers also come from very simple data collection tools, or like just a conversation that we've had, making institutionalizing a conversation that you have with your staff, having that all in one place, and then at the end of the month, just seeing the kind of impact that our staff has been having on our participants. So just those tiny moments I have with a lot of organizations where it just there is a moment where it just translates completely from strategy and just something on paper to actual data, and they're like, wow, like this came together. I think that is definitely the most rewarding part for me.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. All right. So I just really want to take a moment to thank Rahul so much for joining us and leading us through a really insightful conversation. Also, thank all of you for your participating in the polls and participating in the chat, and really, really great questions and thoughts. So like I mentioned before, we will share a recap with key takeaways in the next day or so. And I hope that I can connect with many of you soon, also on a virtual coffee in the near future. So have a great day, everyone.